All right, Val, do your magic and turn this place into a real home by the time I'm back, her husband murmured, pulling his wife into a powerful, tight embrace. Try not to get too bored, okay? Write me, call, send a telegram. Whatever you want. And with that, Valerie saw her husband off for his next 6-month rotation. Edward was out in the oil fields, pulling in some serious cash, enough that they'd finally managed to buy a brand-new apartment in a quiet, residential neighborhood. Truth be told, the woman was no stranger to these long stretches apart. They'd been living this way for years. Valerie herself worked part-time at a local children's center. It wasn't really about the money, since her husband provided for her completely, but more about her genuine love for kids and, well, the need to have something to fill the long, quiet days. They hadn't managed to have any children of their own yet. Believe me, they'd been trying like crazy. But, for one reason or another, it just hadn't happened for the couple. So while Edward figured the best plan was to keep working his shifts and socking away money for a future baby, he'd already saved up for the apartment after all, he left his wife behind with a nice chunk of change for renovations and furniture. Let her handle the decorating, he thought. It'll keep her busy, so she won't be lonely. Scouring the internet, Valerie stumbled upon a private craftsman with glowing reviews who could hang wallpaper and assemble all their new furniture. He sounds like a total godsend, she thought to herself. After a quick look at his rates and a rough budget calculation, she decided he was the perfect fit. And just like that, a handyman named Gregory became a regular fixture in her apartment. At first, things were completely above board. The young man would show up at Valerie's in the morning and get to work transforming her home. Being a kind and thoughtful hostess, she'd often treat him to tea and a bite for lunch, figuring the poor guy needed a break after hours of hard physical labor. Chatting over tea, they slowly started to get to know each other. It turned out Gregory was an incredibly well-rounded guy, someone you could really talk to about anything. Valerie didn't have a huge circle of friends, and the ones she did have were always wrapped up in their own lives. So wow, finding a good companion was a welcome surprise. But then, after a couple of weeks of these daily meetings, Valerie felt her heart starting to pull in a different direction. For the longest time, her husband was the only man in her world, and he'd been gone for what felt like an eternity. And now, suddenly, there was this new person in her life. Young, handsome, in amazing shape from all that constant physical work. Sensing that her husband wasn't coming back anytime soon, Gregory himself started to drop little hints of attention toward the lonely woman. One minute, he'd ask her for something and let his fingers linger on her hand for just a second too long. The next, he'd accidentally drop a compliment. He could see the way she was starting to look at him, and in those moments, he'd make a point of lifting his t-shirt to wipe the sweat from his brow, putting his toned abs on full display. After a few more moves like that, Valerie wasn't the same quiet, modest woman she was before. One afternoon, after Gregory asked her to grab him something from across the room, she just stood there and stared at his face for a long moment. He read the invitation in her eyes, closed the distance between them, and kissed her. The woman kissed him back, and from there, well, one thing led to another. And just like that, a line had been crossed. They were lovers. Well, after what seemed like eons, the home facelift was finally done and dusted, and every last stick of furniture had found its spot. Yet, guess what? Gregory, bless his heart, just kept popping by Valerie's place all the time. Now, Valerie, she was so utterly thrilled, she just chucked all caution to the wind and, poof, stopped even trying to keep her little dalliance with the young fellow under wraps. I mean, come on. It was a brand spanking new neighborhood anyway. Hardly anyone she knew lurking about. So, like, who'd even spot 'em together, right? One fine day, our gal decided to make a quick run to the store. She stepped out, hit the button, and patiently waited for the elevator to whisk her down to the ground floor. Just then, an elderly lady from the neighboring apartment emerged, clearly headed for the same ride. Spotting a fresh face, the grandma, bless her inquisitive soul, figured it was high time for an introduction. "Howdy, neighbor. Ann's the name," she chirped, a friendly smile gracing her lips. "Hi there, I'm Valerie. Lovely to meet you, truly. I haven't been here ages, so I'm still flying solo on the acquaintance front. Oh, but I've actually caught a glimpse of you and your husband a time or two. What a go-getter, a real whiz with his hands. Did he tackle the renovations himself?" the old dear inquired, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. Valerie, caught off guard, hesitated, a slight blush creeping up her cheeks. But seriously, was she really gonna blurt out that he wasn't, actually her husband? And honestly, what did it matter? It was just a neighbor. Why bother explaining the ins and outs of her life? The grandma, quick as a flash, noticed the young woman's slight unease with the question. So she simply offered a kind smile and smoothly steered the conversation in a different direction. Wise old bird she was. Months, a good handful of them, drifted by. Then, lo and behold, the big day arrived. Her husband's homecoming. Edward, suitcase in hand, practically bounded up to their floor, his heart doing a little happy dance at the thought of finally seeing his wife again. He jabbed the doorbell, and mere seconds later, Valerie swung the door open, a radiant smile illuminating her face. He lunged forward, eager to sweep her into a bear hug, holding her tight. But wait, something was definitely in the way. He gently set his wife down, a look of utter bewilderment etched across his face. Why, she had a noticeably rounded belly. "Valerie, you're pregnant?" Her husband was absolutely floored by this bombshell. "No sooner did you leave than I had a slight delay, you see. We did it together." His wife, beaming, took Edward's hand and tenderly placed it on her burgeoning stomach. He just stood there, dumbfounded, utterly at a loss for how to react to this monumental news. "But why on earth didn't you spill the beans over the phone?" he managed to blurt out, still a bit stunned. "Oh, I wanted it to be a grand surprise for when you got back, my love," the woman replied, her lips forming a playful pout. "Aren't you, well, thrilled?" "My goodness, of course. I'm thrilled. What on earth are you even saying?" the husband exclaimed, his voice filled with pure joy, and promptly scooped Valerie up into his arms once more. The couple shared a hearty laugh, basking in the glow of their reunion after such a protracted separation. Edward, however, still harbored a slight bewilderment that his wife hadn't disclosed her pregnancy sooner. It struck him as rather peculiar. Then again, he mused, perhaps hormones had clouded her judgment. Truly, who could fathom the intricacies of a woman's mind in such a state? Regardless, circumstances seemed to align perfectly. This marked Edward's final work rotation. From now on, he'd be home for the long haul, ensuring ample funds for the impending arrival. At last, they could truly embrace life as a bona fide family. Several weeks elapsed since Edward's return. He frequently found himself wandering through the apartment, admiring the flawless, recently completed renovation. "The walls are so smooth, and everything's put together flawlessly," he remarked to his wife one day. Who was the brilliant craftsman behind all this work? Her response was somewhat evasive. "Oh, just some handyman I stumbled upon online." As she uttered these words, a shadow seemed to cross her face. Edward noticed his wife's fleeting discomfort, but ever the understanding husband simply chalked it up to the fluctuating hormones of pregnancy. One evening, Edward decided to rendezvous with his friends to toast the impending addition to their family. The men gathered at the bar, their boisterous congratulations echoing through the establishment. Buoyed by the camaraderie and good cheer, Edward made his way home that night, spirits high. Upon entering the building, he encountered the elderly neighbor patiently awaiting the elevator. They exchanged pleasantries and stepped into the lift together. "Which floor are you headed for?" Edward inquired genially. "The 10th, the old woman replied. "Well, fancy that. We're neighbors then," Edward chirped, a smile on his face as he pressed the corresponding button. They engaged in a delightful conversation during their ascent. Anne, as she introduced herself, proved to be quite an affable companion. When they reached their floor and Edward approached the door to his apartment, the old woman regarded him with a spark of curiosity in her eyes. "So, you must be Valerie's brother?" she queried. Edward stood there, a look of profound confusion etched across his face, staring at his neighbor for a few silent seconds. "Well, yes," he finally replied, a hint of playful inebriation in his voice. He wondered where on earth this line of questioning was leading. "Oh, you're going to have such a handsome nephew, or perhaps a charming niece." The father was so remarkably blonde, with striking blue eyes and incredibly handy. He managed all the renovations himself. "I haven't seen him around lately, though. Did he go back to work?" Anne mused aloud, seemingly lost in thought. Edward sobered instantly, as if doused with a bucket of ice water. The disparate pieces of the puzzle abruptly clicked into place. His prolonged absence, the enigmatic handyman from the internet, his wife's visible discomfort whenever the repairs were mentioned. And now, the neighbor casually referring to him as the father and remarking on his recent absence. Suddenly, with chilling clarity, everything made sense. He curtly bade Anne farewell and stepped into his apartment. That evening, the entire building likely bore witness to the vehement argument that ensued. The following morning, Edward and his wife visited the clinic to ascertain the precise timeline of the pregnancy. The dates, as predicted, simply did not align. There was no conceivable way he could be the biological father. Edward found himself utterly incapable of coexisting with such profound betrayal. Valerie, on bended knees, tearfully pleaded for his forgiveness, but his decision was irrevocably made. Even if she were to transform herself now, how could I ever place my trust in her again, after every single trip away? Despite the agonizing pain, Edward compelled Valerie to leave. Under different circumstances, evicting a pregnant wife might appear merciless, but given that the child was not his, neither was the responsibility. After a period of profound sadness, Edward resumed his rotational work, seeking solace and distraction in the demanding schedule. No time to stew in sorrow when you're caught up in the grind. He relocated to a different city for a span of 6 months. There, he encountered a local cafeteria worker, embarked on a new romantic relationship, and gradually, the memory of his ex-wife faded into the background. It was only later, when introducing his new partner to his circle of friends, that he learned Valerie had indeed given birth, but remained a single mother. "Seems that handyman was only good for one particular kind of work," his friends quipped, their remarks tinged with cynicism. Valerie, he was told, had reportedly moved in with her mother, surprisingly, in the very same neighborhood. Well, Edward mused to himself, a grim satisfaction settling over him. Now she truly understands the repercussions of attempting to have her cake and eat it too. He soon embarked on building a new family, eventually fathering 2 children of his own, whom he loved with every fiber of his being. Is there anything else you'd like me to rephrase or work on?